There was a guy who had been through AA. He was successful in, conquering his addiction through AA. And then a number of years later, he was racked with anxiety. He basically went back to his AA meetings and worked through the process on his anxiety and said that the 12 steps worked great for that. And I thought it was fascinating. I don't want to say this guy was lucky, but he was able to do that because he'd been through it as an addict.
Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey. We'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. In each episode, we will come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters, growth and progress, not perfection, all while developing positive habits for you to utilize. To learn more, please visit positiverecovery.com/podcasts to sign up and to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive Positive Recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Hello, and if you're new here, I'm the host of this podcast, Dr. Jason Powers. We have a special guest today, somebody who is from across the pond. Alex Palmer does a great American accent. He is chief of Filling Our Beds. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, it's taken us a while to get to do this, right? Because you guys have had this podcast going for a while. I've done a bit of podcasting, and now here we are. I get to talk podcast for my job.
Right on. And I'm really happy to have a guest with your accent because Americans hear that as more sophisticated and knowledgeable. So it doesn't matter what you say, it's how you say it.
You're going to get at least like 50% more ratings from the English accent.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about men's health.
Well, specifically men's mental health.
In honor of Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, we're going to delve into things that affect men's mental health and how it affects their work, the relationships, and everything. I think we're going to start by kind of sharing our personal experiences, and then we'll dig into some other stuff. So, do you want to kick us off?
I will, and then when you do, I really want to hear the narcolepsy part of your story. Okay. I thought that was fascinating, but I think it's look. We have similar stories, but like I said in the notes, I think, my mental health challenges have manifested themselves in sort of depression and anxiety. And then I guess, yours may be more on the substance use side, but there's clearly a lot of commonality. Yeah, I guess, I've battled depression a long time, right? And I think when I look back through my history, it first showed itself in my teenage years, but when you're 15, 16, it's really hard to know, like, am I depressed or am I just a teenager, right? So, and then it sort of went away. I had a, really happy period when I was at university. And then as I got into my 30s, life starts to get a little bit challenging. And then definitely into my 40s, I think the environmental stresses that we experience as men was definitely there and has been a major contributor to the regular depression that I've suffered. I've tried a whole bunch of different treatments. I wouldn't say anything has really stuck in a big way, but lots of incremental improvements. It's funny, today actually I went and did my first TMS session.
Yeah. Do you have any reports after your first session?
Not really. I mean, I feel like I'm in quite a good mood, but I don't know whether I was just in a good mood beforehand. And I don't think one session is not, well, the doctor actually was saying some people do walk away from the first session feeling a little bit different, but the protocol that most TMS uses, it requires a lot more sessions, right?
Right.
So we should see more in 2-3 weeks time. I guess, yeah, coming back to my sort of history with this, from suffering with it myself, I think I had this moment where I started talking to friends of mine about this maybe like 10, 15 years ago. And that's when it hit me, the scale of the problem of other men going through mental health challenges. And numerous friends of mine, when I sort of started sharing what I was going through, they were sort of like, yeah, me too, me too. Some of them less serious, some a lot more serious. And just from that, I kind of got fascinated by the subject. And that's what's kind of led me to, to work in this space ultimately. And, I've tried a lot of different therapies. I'm really interested in the sort of intersection of treatment for mental health and men's work, right? And I know that's one thing I wanted to chat to you about, because I think you've had some experience in that. But I've been in a number of different men's groups. Haven't really done any of the sort of like, more retreat stuff, things where you go away to the wilderness and whatever.
Oh, you haven't done the Mankind Project?
No, but it's on my list. And actually, I've got a neighbor here who's been, he's in his like 70s or 80s, and he's heavily involved in Mankind Project. And I went and did a sweat lodge at his place, and so just been chatting with him about that. So that's I guess that's a little bit about sort of my history and what's got me here. I don't know whether you want to sort of compare and contrast with your story.
We could do that. I was going to kind of ask about how you got interested in men's health and men's mental health, specifically men's mental health, after sort of learning you weren't alone. And what kind of world did that open up for you?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess it opened up a world of like building closer relationships with some of my male friends that were going through similar issues. And there's one or two friends in particular who I've got much closer to through us kind of helping each other through what we're going through. And, at various times, like, maybe one of my friends was going through something much, much more serious, and I was able to like help him out. And then other times I've leaned on a few of my other friends more when I've needed it. So I guess it's sort of reinforced the value in like having close male friends that you can share this type of stuff about. The other thing is I guess it just opened my eyes to the scale of the problem.
I mean, totally. The scale of the problem is a big sort of a epiphany, or, it's very educational when you start to like look at it under the hood, and like men are less likely to seek mental health, but we have like the worst, adverse reactions to it, like, because men are successfully committing suicide more than women. So there's that piece about like, yeah, the numbers are there. We don't really talk about it. And certainly, like, I love how you said that the bonding that happens when people are sort of going through the same struggles, because, I've been sober almost 21 years now. And I certainly went to a plethora of meetings early in recovery. I mean, a ton, and grew close with, a lot of the dudes and, some women, but like I went to a lot of men's meetings, and, even when I see them, I haven't seen them in 5 to 10 years. It is really like no time has passed. And these aren't guys I grew up with, but that's sort of like one of the greatest things about the recovery communities, is just how like sort of equalizing going through the same struggle can be. That is, it doesn't matter if you're highly educated or wealthy or the exact opposite. Like, it's sort of, you realize we're all in this together, and things like class and all that is inconsequential when it comes to like getting right in life. Doing life is way more important than all the other labels. And I think that's sort of awesome.
Yeah, especially when you look at like, I mean, this plays into some of the positive psychology stuff, right? But when you look at the stats on like the relationship of money to happiness, right? And clearly you get to a point where more money doesn't equal more happiness, right?
Yeah.
And some of the happiest people are people that have very little, or like the Amish that have a very, very simple life without any distractions. One of the things I'm curious about with all of this is this like this intersection of like mental health and then the work that we do in substance use and addiction. Would you say that your path to going into recovery because you had a problem with addiction, like how similar was that to just having mental health issues, and that was the way that it manifested itself and the way that you dealt with it?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I don't know. I don't want to sound like I know a bunch of diagnoses and am like self-diagnosing myself. So like I completely understand if you're like skeptical, but I really think like my experience in the world was like as soon as I was conscious, I kind of felt separate. I felt like odd, kind of weird. I kind of and this even at a young age, like I just sort of like thought everybody else had the guidebook and they didn't give it to me.
Yeah.
And like I would see, and a lot of it had to do with, nobody's parents are perfect, but I mean, there's a lot of like trauma in my family of origin and a lot of mental health, my family, like on both sides. So, I kind of just the luck of the genetic lottery, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was probably at times a depressed kid, and I mean, it's really hard to say like how much was it nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
I certainly self-medicated. I definitely had ADD, definitely have ADD. It's interesting. Kids that have it and are treated appropriately, even with stimulant medication like Adderall, Vyvanse, they have less substance use and truancy and all this stuff because they're getting it treated. And people worry about, don't take Adderall, don't give a kid Adderall, they'll develop into an addict. And the truth is like, man, I lived through it. Like if you have ADD untreated to at least the extent that it interferes with your life,
yeah,
then you're going to self-medicate. And so, there was at least that. There was probably depression, a whole, a slew of like nurture things that weren't great. And, probably any kid would want to like run away from or distract oneself from. So kind of, I found food to be a really great youth, like anesthetic, if you will. Like I remember my entire life goal when I was young was to work at a convenience store so I could have access to the candy. I mean, I really didn't understand how things work, but like it food definitely played a role. And then, I started smoking marijuana when I was about 13. And it quickly became like multiple daily thing.
Mm-hmm.
That just kind of like ran its course because it really was like whenever I used it, especially kind of towards later my life, it just, all I felt was like dirty and I just wanted it to be over. And so probably it had outlived its usefulness. And, alcohol was used and, also as a social lubricant and an anesthetizing agent. And, it progressed because I was able to stop for like long periods of time as I was in college and med school and residency. Like, there's eyes on you and you're getting, drug screened. And it was important to me to like become a doc. But once that was over,
mm-hmm.
I didn't really have to be sober anymore. And the addiction just like got really bad very quick. So I finished my residency. I was like, had a, license. I was working with somebody who I respected at the time, was like a mentor,
mm-hmm.
but my addiction just got bad quick. And, I was like, passing out in public and kind of drooling and just looking like I was heavily sedated as I was.
Uh-huh.
And when people ask me, hey, what's going on? And I just like, at that point, lying becomes like a survival skill, if that makes sense. Cause I thought I needed to like keep going the way that I need oxygen. So I like,
mm-hmm.
I told everybody I had narcolepsy and, of course they called BS. So I went to get a sleep study and sort of read ahead of time on like how to, like what a positive looks like for narcolepsy. So I just tried to mimic that. And
mm-hmm.
I kind of manipulated the results to get the diagnosis. So like I had like a year where, my friends and family were like defending me. People were like, what's wrong with Jason?
Wow.
And they'd say, no, he has narcolepsy. And, a couple of my friends were like, bullshit, he's up. So there was a intervention and, thank God that's no relapse since.
How much of that you think was clearly you're a doctor, you're under an immense amount of environmental stress, right? Do you think this would have happened if you hadn't been a doctor, or how much did being a doctor either contribute or accelerate what happened?
I mean, I think I would have been an addict. I would have developed addiction anyway. Yeah. It's just like the style in which it happened was definitely accelerated or whatever, mediated because of the MD. Because I had a DEA license and I could order like copious amounts of
Oh,
I know it was ugly, but it made it work. Probably made it worse and accelerated it quicker, which really I could be grateful for in a way, because like here I am.
Yeah,
like it turned out.
Yeah. Do you think when you look at the work that you do now at Positive Recovery, I don't know what the stats are off the top of your head, that what's the gender breakdown of people coming through recovery business? It skews heavily towards men, right?
Well,
or not?
I mean, it kind of does. I mean, the stats about men and women in treatment, I think, is close to like 55-45 or 60-40, something like that.
Okay. In favor of men.
Yeah, in favor of men. And the thing is, men and women have the exact same propensity of developing addiction. It's just that men outnumber women in about the same ratio as them that seek treatment, because men have higher rates of use. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, like if the population was split 50-50 and a group of them were like experimenting more or using more, naturally they're going to have a higher pool of exposure and they're going to develop addiction in higher numbers, but not at a higher percentage, if that makes sense, because we have the exact same percentage of developing addiction. Men and women are equal in that respect. It's just that we, I think, are more impulsive and we're like more likely to
more impulsive and more inclined to like risk-taking behavior.
Right. Exactly.
Right. That's a classic like masculine trait. That's interesting that you say it affects men and women have the same propensity to develop addiction, but then it accelerates with men because of the risk-taking behavior.
Not so much accelerates, it increases the incidence, like the numbers of men are higher.
Right. Do men and women react differently to treatment? So when they're going through the program in recovery or they're going to meetings, do you see a difference?
Yeah, anecdotally, I guess it is anecdotally, but like women more than men seem to like love the positive psychology world. But there's a huge number of men who love it too. It's just that it's more like, 60-40 women to men. But in terms of positive recovery, we see more men than women because we're a treatment center in the United States that, takes both sexes.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get back to, you didn't talk about your experience with men's work.
Yeah.
Let's tell me what you've tried and what you've been involved in. I'm so curious on like that intersection of like, the tools and the things in men's work, whether it's groups or whether it's retreats, and how that can help with with more classic mental health diagnosis or addiction.
Yeah, so I'm not really an expert in like capital M men's work, like Robert Bly and all that. I just don't think I could speak about it because I have done I've done the the New Warrior, the Mankind Project. I did it once. I didn't continue and do like the groups and stuff, but I was part of a.
What was your experience of the weekend training?
It was great. In fact, like I was part of a sweat lodge community for a long time, and a lot of those dudes went through that. So I was inspired to go through it. And, I think that the type of work that's done, it really wouldn't work in a mixed group of like, men and women and whatever, because, it's just like, it's harder to get vulnerable, I think, when there's like all these other social norms impressed upon you. But it's kind of like on one aspect, you have the absence of sort of like having to play certain societal roles and you can just chill out with the boys in a way. Mm-hmm. In that respect, yeah, like it's liberating and when people are more, when they feel safer, they're more likely to share and go deeper. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if there was any like specific men work. Again, I just don't feel like I could speak on it, but I was in a group. I did group therapy for a while
Yeah.
And it was all men. And I kind of had the same experience.
I mean, it's the same. It's the same model. You know, any most group therapy or peer support groups are a very similar therapeutic model to most men's groups, and that's why I think men's groups work, and that's why I think that more men should try them out. And then, especially, I think that more men who are doing the work on themselves, and if you're going to therapy, you'd benefit from being in a men's group at the same time.
Yeah, man.
It's kind of like low hanging fruit almost, you know.
Totally, I couldn't agree more.
What about so I've just been through the positive psychology training that we do at work.
Oh, positive recovery.
So all new employees go through a training to learn about positive psychology, and I'm reading the book by Martin Seligman, Authentic Happiness. And so I came across this bit this morning, which I think is quite relevant. And he's talking about how so much unhappiness is caused by just pursuing like cheap pleasures, right?
Right.
Instead of what he calls gratification, which is the satisfaction that we get from pursuing like a flow activity, right? Where there's some degree of, it might be something that's a little bit hard or challenging, but that's rewarding. And then because we were doing this podcast today, it got me thinking, well, like so many men are probably trapped in this cycle of like pursuing like short-term pleasures, right? Whether it's drinking, fast food, watching porn, watching too much TV,
smoking cigarettes.
Exactly. And it's almost like society makes it so easy for men in particular to take the easy option and just pursue those things. And it's not surprising that so many men are depressed, right? When all of that stuff is so easy, and then doing the opposite to that, which is doing hard things which give you some gratification, that's a lot harder to do, right?
Yeah. And that's sort of the Aristotelian, version of happiness, like true happiness or eudaimonia
mm-hmm.
involves pleasure, but it is what's called the higher pleasure. So I think Marty's saying it's, the gratifying or higher pleasures that can induce a state of flow, but also can be things like, having a deep conversation with close friends. Is people sort of know that visceral feeling, and it's different than having a conversation with somebody else, say that you could kind of tell, like you might go to a comedy show and laugh, and okay, that's great, that's pleasurable, but that's sort of like a lower pleasure, the way that smoking cigarettes or eating chocolate or sex, that type of thing. But sex can also be higher,
mm-hmm.
When there's like love and deep connection and everything. And yeah, so pursuing those higher pleasures,
Yeah, well, it makes me wonder about like modern society. I don't think it doesn't do good things for a lot of men, I think. If you look at the sort of Industrial Revolution and I don't think anybody should sit at a desk from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that you make everybody do that, it's not surprising they're going to feel sad when we're kind of, programmed to be out in nature and doing hard things. And, I think especially for men, that's why you see this renewed interest in this whole men's work thing, because it's kind of it's giving men like a glimpse of that more primitive lifestyle, right? In a way, sort of taking you out of the 9 to 5 of being in a cubicle and like putting them in nature and putting them in a difficult, challenging situation and putting them around other men that will challenge them. And I don't know whether it's like sweat lodges or sitting around a fire, or they kind of hark back to like simpler, more primitive times, right?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe that's what we all need.
Man, yeah, like definitely attractive, this like primitive utopian vision.
Mm-hmm.
But I love air conditioning.
That's because you live in Houston, where it's a necessity.
Oh my God, it's going to be so hot. But yeah, like the ability to turn off a screen, for me, I'm like having to practice and like get some endurance with that. I used to love camping for that reason. Just being primitive, and like all you have the stars, you have the sound of animals, and yeah, it's the best.
Yeah. What are they? What are the sort of cornerstones for you of maintaining, sound mental health, sobriety, those sorts of things? What are your go-tos for staying on track these days?
So central to everything is like good sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep is like the cornerstone of how I like go about the world. If I don't get good sleep, I'm gonna eat like high sugar and high fat, high salt, because like my brain craves it. And it's unfortunate that I know that, so I sort of succumb to it gladly. But no, but then, like I don't like to eat unhealthy, and then my energy's off, my mood's off. And my ADD gets bad.
What specifically do you do to make sure you get good sleep?
Man, earplugs, or I listen to an audiobook, and that's like puts me out. It's great. But then I have to like go back and figure out where I was. But eye shades are great because there's gentle pressure on the outside of your eyelid, and that's sort of like a parasympathetic or the relaxation nervous system stimulator. So that helps. I try not to eat within 2-3 hours of going to sleep, because that also can keep me up. So sleep, moving, it's important that I move every day. I think we are designed to move, and you're right. Like sitting sedentary is like as bad for you as smoking.
Yeah.
Sitting at a desk, it's kind of like your risk factors, heart attacks and strokes. It's like not great.
Yeah.
I wish I knew the number to sound better than it's not great. But anyway, so moving, sleeping, eating well.
What do your movement practices look like? Do you have a go-to like sport or activity?
I like to do weight resistance and cardio, and with other people as much as possible. Not that I like to do the like groups, because it seems to mess up my back. I'm now 54 and blah, blah, blah. But there's some guys at the gym that I go to that sort of, we like to do high intensity interval trainings. And so when we see each other, we're sort of like, okay, that's kind of what we're going to do. And we do some cardio and some planks. I could do a 3-minute plank now because of these guys. Like it's crazy. So yeah, I like to try to, I stretch during the day if I can.
Yep.
Some people kind of like do these like golf swings in the middle of nowhere. I'll just start stretching because it feels good, and I got to move. So there's those two things.
What about on the, you touched on diet a little bit. Do you follow any sort of specific food rules? Well,
I try not to have rules, because I'll break them if I have a rule, but I feel better when I don't eat a lot of meat. So I'd say I'm like 95% vegetarian.
Yep.
And I love whole grain type of stuff. I'm totally into sourdough. So I make it. I have that on hand every day. And it's great because I know it's bread, but man, the bacteria and the yeast and naturally occurring, slow leavened sourdough bread is like the most healthy bread that you can have.
Yep.
Low glycemic index if you use also whole wheat or a whole wheat mixture. But I think if you just use white bread flour, I don't think the glycemic index is lower.
Yeah. And then what about on the recovery side? You mentioned, so you've been sober for what you said, 20 something years.
Coming up, yeah, in June I'll have 21 years, so a little shy.
Does that require a specific practice these days, or is it's just ingrained because you've been at it for so long? Do you still go to meetings? Like what does that look like for you?
Okay, I'd say both. Like I don't go to as many meetings as I used to.
Yeah.
And I do think that like I know I cannot relapse and have anything good happen. So like I know that in every fiber of my body. It's not like, oh, I could relapse and it will be great, I'll manage it better. Nah, for me it's like sticking my face into an engine, like an airplane engine in the air. Just like there's nothing good that's gonna happen. So is it ingrained to that point? Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I do enjoy going to meetings. I don't go to as many, but like, I went to one last weekend. I'm going to go to one tomorrow. And so maybe once a month, twice a month, but I don't feel like I need to go like I used to, for sure. It's a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. There was another podcast I was listening to. I can't remember which one it was. Maybe I'll find it and put the link in. There was a guy who he'd been through AA for addiction. Forget what his addiction was. Anyway, so he'd been through the process. He went to meetings. He was successful in conquering his addiction through AA. And then a number of years later, he found himself he was racked with anxiety. So he had really bad, like, rumination, couldn't turn off the negative thoughts. He basically went back to his AA meetings and worked through the process on his anxiety and said that the 12 steps worked great.
I could see that.
And I thought it was fascinating. And I thought it was kind of like, I don't want to say this guy was lucky, but he was able to do that because he'd been through it as an addict. It's not like me as somebody who's depressed can rock up at an AA meeting and say, yeah, hi, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm just really curious to go through your process and see if it helps with my mental health.
Right. Yeah. From that perspective, totally. There are so many good therapists who are themselves sober, and like AA is influenced by Carl Jung, who was a psychoanalyst, right?
Yeah.
William James, who was the father of American psychology, and then there's the Oxford group. So those are the three influences. So I could totally see how the process of kind of letting go of something that's out of your control and then shifting your focus, I could see how that would work. But that's sort of what happens in therapy also.
Well, I think it depends on your therapist.
True that.
To a very large extent, and that's maybe one of the problems with therapy, is that it's so broad and there are so many different types, and so much of it is really just comes down to that therapeutic relationship, and is your therapist any good?
Right.
And that's been my experience. I'm not sure therapy has ever really worked that well for me. I'm sure it's worked, it has had some positive effects. One of the things that I always find, and I think this is very common for men, and as I research this topic more about like why do men not go to therapy, and why does a lot of therapy not work for men? A lot of it is we need pushing, right? We need to rock up to a therapy session, and at the end of it, the therapist needs to go, right, here's your homework. You need to go do this, 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 and this, and I want you to go and practice this, 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 and this, right? Instead of just turning up and having a chat once a week.
Right. I definitely think they need to direct you, but some people could definitely use like concrete steps, and
yeah.
And I think it just kind of, you have to figure out how whoever you're trying to help, how they learn best also.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just coming back to the previous thing about the guy who worked the 12 steps for his anxiety. I wonder what would happen if depressed or anxious people could go to a 12-step meeting.
Right.
Like,
man,
what sort of a benefit would that have on people, on our collective mental health?
Man, like if it was devoid of professionalism, and I don't know, and it'd have to be free. It'd have to like have all the same parameters, so that I just would hate to see it like attacked by the legal system or the American medical, whatever. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if mutual self-help groups that, there's no like leaders in AA, really.
Yeah.
There's no outside opinions on anything. They stay anonymous. And so I think for they have traditions, and like, I think that's why it's so successful and it's stuck around for so long. And yeah, man, why don't you start AA I can't tell you to do that. I'm a doctor, but you know what I mean.
AA for depressed people. Depressives Anonymous.
Yeah.
I guess for anybody that's listening that isn't familiar with the 12 steps, pick out maybe 2 or 3 that you think, oh, like those are really relevant to mental health, and those help people if they're depressed or anxious.
Man, I think, there's a kind of stoic wisdom underneath the 12 steps, and like it's exemplified in the Serenity Prayer. So even though the Serenity Prayer is not an official step, it's said usually at every meeting. And that's great for mental health, man. I mean, that's figuring out what you can do and what you can't do is profound wisdom, right? And the courage to act when you can, and then also the courage to do nothing when you can't do anything for the situation. That's sort of imbued in kind of the 12 steps. And, you take a moral inventory every night. So you sort of, and people don't wait until the end of the day to like do it, even though officially it says, at the end of the day you do it. because you sort of learn the value of taking responsibility for you and you alone and looking at you and what, what your part was. And that helps tremendously so that you can, not blame or be victim, sort of also not take up more than your space or less than your space, if that makes sense. Like you don't shrink so much. You take responsibility. You're not blaming the other person. You kind of know where you start and stop. It helps with boundaries. Yeah, I think it has tremendous application. I mean, there's a lot of steps that are specific to alcohol and that have the word God in them that I'm like avoiding.
Yeah.
But I do like the taking moral inventory and sort of when we're wrong, promptly admitted it. Boom.
Yeah. Yeah. What about, I guess, switching gears a little bit to positive psychology, which is what the treatment program that we work on is based on. Do you find that, do men resonate stronger with certain elements of positive psychology? Are there parts of the tools that you use that you think are more appropriate to men?
I don't know appropriate. I think it's appropriate for any human being.
Yeah.
And it's not a positive psychology thing per se, but there are these like what I call brain blockers to happiness. They're sort of tools, subconscious tools that are in us that at one point helped us survive. They save energy and other things that men really like the negativity, learning about negativity bias. And, that's sort of the brain naturally is more attracted by and lights up more when there's like a scary face or negative news. When we remember negative things more, well, it's sort of like the looking for threats.
Yeah.
And sort of realizing why am I more self-critical than I am, maybe self-congratulatory? Could be because of negativity bias, right? And sort of why do I judge so hard? It could be because of that. Learning about it and why it was sort of around and how it helped us survive as a species and how it's outlived its usefulness gives people the power to argue against it. That makes sense. And you can kind of rewire your brain so you're not so habitually, self-critical and negative, and which are symptoms that we see a lot in depression.
Yeah. And I guess the emphasis on relationships as well in positive psychology plays into another big problem that men face, which is being isolated these days, right? And a lot of men, I forget, there's some shocking statistics about the percentage of men that don't say they have a close friend that they could call on for something.
Oh my God, I saw that. Very low. It's very shocking. Men love that. Like I just did a relationship group with some of the inpatients, and they love the relationship piece where we kind of go over active, constructive responding. That's a really cool thing I learned in my master's. It takes almost no work to learn how to be a better friend.
Yeah. Can you expand on that a little bit? That acronym you just used?
Yeah. So ACR, or active constructive responding, is like the way to respond when someone shares good news with you. That strengthens relationships, reinforces bonds, makes the other person feel valued, and all this other stuff. And there's four general ways to respond when somebody shares good news with you, which, by the way, is an honor because there's 8 billion people on the planet. And, if somebody picks you out to share their good news with you, it's pretty cool. If you can respond in an active, engaged way with their news and constructive, you're like, yeah, that's great. Like, tell me more, that type of thing. It's really like, that's the way that's healthy for relationships. The other three, where there's one version where you say that, oh, that's nice, but you're doing something else. You're like not engaged.
Yeah.
That erodes a relationship. If you point out the negative things that, associated with the good news, you might be doing it to shit on them, but more likely you might be doing it because you're afraid they don't see it. That also erodes relationships. You can, show up for them, be positive, relive it with them, and then say, hey, this is awesome. Like, can we circle back on this? I want to think about it a little bit. And then, you pick another time where you do it. So there's the understated, that's nice, but you're not engaged. There's the maybe pointing out the negative stuff. And then there's the like not at all engaged in their news. And you don't even say that's nice. You either like one up them or you just talk about yourself. Like, example of that would be, hey, Alex, man, I just came in second place and, this band, this live, open mic night. And if you said, you would not believe what happened to me on the way to work. I hit like, if you didn't even acknowledge I had good news and just talked about yourself, that's like, it's called passive destructive. And that's not a good way.
Yeah.
But we know people like that, right?
Well, we know people like that. And also just when you're describing this sort of thing, it's amazing how many like typical like male traits you think about with the negative ways that you just spoke about. Just like typical like bloke culture of like banter and taking the piss out of each other. And especially if I think back to like, Anglo-Saxon, English, Australian.
Oh God, yes.
That type of like relentless piss taking between supposedly good mates. I'll tell you a funny story about this. When I got together with Gretchen, who's my wife, who is American, she came to visit me in the UK, and we went to visit my best friends from university. They are all dear friends of mine. And we were out, we went out for dinner or something. There was a lot of banter. There was a lot of piss taking. And I think we got home, and then Gretchen started crying. I'm like, what's the matter? And she goes, I just don't understand why your friends are all so mean to you. Because with her, and she was saying with her and her girlfriends, they are each other's biggest cheerleaders, right? And it's all like building each other up. And what you were talking about, those 4 ways, it was all absolutely that first one. Whereas like me and my uni mates was all the others. But
right.
we somehow managed to, not let it us up completely, and we're still friends.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, cultural differences are a thing in our house. Should we anything else before we wrap this up? Any other like pearls of wisdom from the world of positive psychology? What would Martin Seligman say if he was on and we were talking about men's mental health?
Oh man, he might not even answer your question. He's liable to talk about whatever he wants to talk about. Or he'll say like, this is, men and women, they essentially respond the same. But let me tell you about this new study. Yeah, I think it was great having Alex around. Some key takeaways is that men's mental health awareness faces several key issues that block effective recognition, treatment, and support. And these issues are like stigma and societal expectations, like society expects that men should be stoic, self-reliant, and emotionally resilient without asking for help. And asking for help is a perception of weakness, which is silly because one of the most powerful things you can do is ask for help. There's, insufficient public awareness, and there's educational gaps that mean that a lot of men don't recognize the symptoms for what they are. So yeah, I felt it was really educational and enjoyable, and I hope you enjoy it as well. And remember, until next time, this is not a dress rehearsal. So be good to yourself and be good to others.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecovery.com/podcast to sign up to get your daily positive interventions sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4-SOBRIETY. That's 877-476-2743. Our why is simple. We care. We are here to help.